Um,
Oh god, so it was never
for
recording?
the sake of posterity, do you want to give us that, summarize that again, Luna, so we can pick up, we could start the recording. So what you got out of left, right, and center was
Yeah, so what I got out of left, right, and center was that there was nothing really new that I was exposed to because I already had a good idea of how like the different news outlets worked, like and where their mindsets were. But I was able to get more new like sources, like news-wise, like Now This News, which is kind of more centered and more straight to the point. And like every once in a while, when they bring up like current events, like they'll bring up like statistics or just like more ideas to like back them up and just help them kind of drive the point home to the reader and the viewer.
so you're more or less a liberal, right, Luna? When you say you sort of lean left,
I don't really have a label myself politically. I just don't want the country to burn. That's all I care about. So
did you have any kind of I'm gonna assume though that you're more liberal than conservative. I may be wrong, but I'm wondering if you had any experiences with the right wing media that were a surprise to you or different. Did you check
no,
any
I mean,
hardcore?
no, like I said, I don't really put a label on myself because I didn't used to be really political. It wasn't until like this COVID crap started that I started paying more attention to the news. So
So
yeah,
no side of the ideological spectrum on news throws you for a loop when you listen to it now.
no, because I mean, like growing up, like obviously when I was a kid, I didn't really pay attention to the news, but although maybe I could say I was kind of grew up in an NBC kind of house because that's usually what was always on. So I never like had the concept of like left wing, right wing media as a kid. So it was just never something that I paid attention to. But then I think now more recently looking back, I would start to maybe notice a few things.
Did any of you guys get the sense while you were listening, like, wow, these people are on a totally different planet?
Oh, she's typing.
I think Noe's trying to get her get her audio on. Not the news
She's
themselves,
not
but
the news networks themselves, but oh, she's the
people,
people they interviewed.
yeah, the talking heads. What's wrong with
In,
does your audio not work,
in
or do you have to keep it off, Noe? Oh, she
I
doesn't have
just oh come on.
to be quiet. Oh, she just doesn't have headphones. But can't you talk? You can talk. She doesn't want to. I don't think she wants to talk today. She's feeling like not talking. That's cool. That's her right.
I think she wants to give more people the limelight.
You think so? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Well, she'll have
she's usually pretty chatty. So
yeah. Um, nobody was thrown for a loop. Nobody was like, "Wow, these people are crazy out here on Breitbart." Maybe you guys didn't go extreme enough? You didn't like anybody listen to Rush Limbaugh or Breitbart or any of this kind of thing?
I watched Tucker Carlson.
How was that?
It was pretty. It was kind of like what you said. I was very taken aback by just how like extreme he was getting about certain things. Like it was just very pointed and like very very heated about it. It wasn't like it wasn't objective or anything. And obviously there's something to be said about like the left wing side of it too. But it was very like unabashed.
Uh huh. Can you give us an example of something that like got you up? Like
Well, he just he was very. The one I watched, or part of it was him covering like the negative side of the BLM protests and things, and he would extrapolate like broad takeaways from like one or two protesters or like one group and be like, this is why like all of them are bad. It's because of like this one group that got arrested, blah blah blah, and if nothing else, it felt like a major logical fallacy to apply that.
Uh,
It was, yeah,
what was his thrust about all of these? No, he added in some things here. He said, you have to pay to listen to Rush? Really? You have to pay? I guess I really haven't tried to listen to Rush. Is that true? I'm not going to pay.
Well, I mean, if he has like a podcast, I guess that kind of makes sense. But
I thought he was just on FM radio or AM radio. If you have a radio dial anymore. I don't even think I have a radio tuner anymore. You went to his website, yeah. So anybody else get freaked? I mean, so what was his, Noah, what was Tucker Carlson's message about the protests? You think they were okay, kind of in the good spirit of democracy, but maybe a little excessive? No, did you catch my question?
wait, Noah or Noe?
Noah.
Sorry, I think my connection cut out right when you were talking. I didn't hear anything you said. I'm
I
sorry.
was saying, what was Tucker Carlson's message about the protest? What was his overall take? That they're okay, healthy democracy, just a little bit. They get a little carried away.
I think he mostly talked about like property damage and like how it seemed kind of pointless because it didn't seem to accomplish anything. He didn't really go into like whether or not it was democratic and more on just like he didn't see a point to it. He was like, this isn't achieving anything. You're just making a lot of noise for no reason and bothering innocent people.
But he didn't portray it as like the end of America or like, did he?
Not in the way that it was undemocratic, but more just that it reflected a general un-Americanness of the greater public, and just that like although protesting is like something you have the right to do, he took it as like this is like such a like besmirchment of our American rights and duties and responsibilities.
Huh? You make him sound kind of reasonable. I don't know.
That's on me. Don't.
Yeah, I know, but right, but you still like. I feel like you cut it
I
down.
forgot what I wrote.
Tucker is a lot more intense than you're maybe making him out to be. Am I right about that, you guys?
Yeah, I'm trying to give it the objectivity that he didn't. Yeah, he was a lot more fiery about it than I'm being.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, and did any of you guys discover any news sites or any good media that you would recommend to others in the process? All gas, no brakes. What's that? That sounds like somebody's intestinal problems. Sorry. I have some juvenile humor I throw in on Zoom sometimes. It's a YouTube channel. Is that like a lefty? Is it lefty? No, it's not Bernie type of thing. It's chaotic neutral. That's an interesting phrase. Wow, chaotic neutral. I love it. Hold on. You know, I listened to the last videos. I put them up already, and I realized I'm shouting at the top of my lungs the entire time. And I don't know if you guys have any idea why, but if I were you, I'd probably hate me. But it's because there's a really loud fan the entire time. So I'm shouting over but you can't hear my fan, but I can. So I just shut it off. And now I can talk much more calmly, even though now I'm going to just sweat. So, okay. Anyways, they don't give us air conditioning here in faculty housing. So anyways, let me ask this a different way. Beyond whatever you experienced out of this narrow assignment, has anybody been sharing the sentiment I have that we're trying to talk about the Revolutionary Era press, or now we're going to talk about early 19th century press, and in the middle of this, there's utter mayhem and the entire like planet and democracy is in rapid meltdown. And for all we know, the whole country is going to go up in flames in November when the wheels fall off of our election, and that people are running around like they're chickens, like chickens with their heads cut off, believing that they're satanic, worshiping cults run by the Democrats or whoever else that molest children, and all of these other insane conspiracies, and basic science isn't getting through. And it's almost like, how does a news literacy class like keep up with the challenges? Like, is it really productive for us to talk about the birth of the penny press and the influence of money and profits in the 1830s and how that kind of always shaped the character of the press, when right now, I mean, are you, in other words, are you guys following what's going on every day the way I am and just saying, how do we even funnel this into a class on news literacy? There's so much wrong. There's so many challenges. There's so many problems. What videos do we share? What readings do we share? How do we even go about this anymore? Can anyone relate to that? You can.
I'm a little confused by the question.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is I'm a news junkie, right?
Right.
And I think that these days when you follow the news closely, it's hard not to get a bit terrified and feel a bit fatalistic. That like facts, like we have achieved total liftoff. There is no longer any rationality or any facts. Facts don't matter anymore. I mean, we seem to have gotten to a point with the Trump presidency where there is nothing that would come out about him in the news that is going to change any views among the public. Like everybody is so, like you can agree or disagree, but everybody is so deeply entrenched in their ideology or whatever, or in whatever they believe, that that the facts don't even, whatever the news is reporting isn't even relevant. Nobody's listening. And so it's hard to know how to teach this and how to talk about it when it almost seems like if I get into the details of, the usual press history that I would teach, why I feel like I'm talking about something irrelevant when the real news about news literacy, I'm not even dealing with.
Yeah, okay, I can kind of see that. Yeah, because there was definitely what was it in Nevada over the weekend? Like you had some 100,000 Trump supporters show up, and then even when the science is there, I know there were some news outlets that asked the supporters hey, why aren't you wearing a mask? And they're like, oh, 'cause it's not real, even though that there's scientific evidence. So I think definitely the fact that people are caught in their own little bubble is definitely tricky and something difficult for us to come out of, because I think people have always had that mindset. Well, some people, there was a small group that used to have that mindset before the Trump presidency, and I think now, because he's being more ignorant and just disregarding the facts, he's setting that example, and he's becoming that minority percentage, and now it's expanding into more kind of people who just don't care about the news. I think to say that it would be kind of pointless to do that now, I don't think that would be a smart move, just because we need to be reminded about what the news is and how do we go about this, because knock on wood, if Biden gets into office, then maybe he's going to start bringing back the honesty in the news media, and he's going to become the role model for people to go back to sticking to the facts and not just going off and doing his own thing.
But have you guys been following the reporting that people are saying, no matter how this goes, this election is going to turn into a violent, chaotic mess? We are almost guaranteed, this thing is, right now, unless there's some kind of serious intervention, we are almost guaranteed to, we are driving straight into a constitutional crisis in, a few weeks. And nobody on either side is going to trust the results. And, there's the postal system is chaos. There's all of this bad faith and questioning of all the things going on. You know, have you guys been reading these same news reports that are saying this?
That's why I pulled back from news a lot. It's just because it was so scary and I was just so terrified of everything that could happen because like the possibilities are endless and I could definitely see how the world is basically, not the world, maybe just America is like heading towards this road with disaster, you know? So I feel like, I don't know. Yeah, I was really like immersed in this news world where I was just wanting to know about absolutely everything. But the more that I've come to know, the more I've been afraid. So.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that like I wouldn't be doing my job in this class if I didn't acknowledge right now that we are at this, you know, like it or not, we happen to be doing this class at a major turning point in this subject. And so an important project that I have to take on with you all is how did this entire thing that we're talking about of democracy and the public sphere and the role that this is all to have, how did this completely all fall apart, not only in our lifetimes, but as we're watching this happen live, as we're trying to do a course in this. And I think that we have to investigate that, and I don't have the answers, you know, but I think collectively we have to talk about what has brought us to this point. I mean, just to give you guys an example of what I'm talking about. So this is the New York Times today. So the former director of national intelligence was a guy named Dan Coates. And he was fired by Trump. And he just did, where is his op-ed here?
Was that the one that did the scratch op-ed, or?
What's at stake in this election? The American democratic experiment. Says now they've kept changing this headline, but at times it's read, you know, basically it is all going to fall apart right now. You know, basically that's what this is said, and he's saying, okay, right now we have to have a bipartisan commission to make sure that the election, you know, is resolved correctly. And when they're getting on the news shows today and they're saying, well, what do you think of this? And they're asking, you know, at least Democratic congressmen and senators, like, can we have a bipartisan commission? They're saying no. They're saying, you know, we don't trust the Republicans that they really want a fair election. And so one of them countered and said, we need international election monitors in here. We can't just have the Congress have a quote unquote bipartisan commission. We're not as a country, we're no longer capable of that. Like, there are too many people who are just not even interested in it being fair. They're interested in winning. And the only way that we would actually be able to resolve this is if we outsource this and we asked, like England, or, you know, an international group of observers, just like we do when we go observe an election in, like, I don't know, name a country, you know, some Eastern European country, or, you know, Peru, or I don't know, wherever. Right?
But that's not in any way like what the supposed allegations are that Russia had or Ukraine had any interference. That's just more kind of them just being spectators, or like, what do you mean by like they're getting like international help?
Well, I mean, Luna, he's saying there are so many like dangerous lines intersecting all at once right now on the election that there needs to be some kind of like, including the Russian interference. And he was the former head of national intelligence. So yes, he's very much talking about Russian interference. He's saying there's so many lines of this coming in that are threatening the integrity of our elections right now, that the only way that we're going to save it is if we do an immediate intervention and we set up a bipartisan commission to delegate it. And then when people who are part of Congress were asked about this, they were like, that won't work because there are too many people in the Congress, in the government, that are not interested in a fair election anymore, that are partisan. And we wouldn't even be able to set up a bipartisan commission that was functional, even if we wanted to. We're that far gone. So we would have to turn to international observers, to people from outside this country, to monitor our election. Like we're one of those struggling banana republics, or, I hate to say it, but that's usually where we send election monitors, right? We send it to these countries that are struggling to have their first elections or to get their things sorted out. He's like saying, they were saying just today, we are that far gone. Has anyone else had any other experiences that, being a news junkie, like anything else, we're talking about how we get lost in our own information rabbit holes here. So has anyone else had a completely different experience in the last few weeks that that you want to bring up, that's a different way of looking at everything? All right, let me share this one clip to the point that I'm making about all of this. If I can find it, hold on. Just a second. Here it is. So this is John Meacham, you'll see him on cable news a lot. But I like him. He's an academic, and he's like what you'd call a public historian, which means he's a serious historian, but what he's good at is talking to the masses, talking to the mass public. That's his thing. And this is what he has to say. They may jump in with a damn commercial, but hopefully not. Let's see.
Number of things that raised a lot of eyebrows, and we're just going to play just a few of these things. And
I can't see the recording.
Specifically, the president talking about coronavirus testing.
Can't see the screen?
No.
All right, let me turn on. You guys see the screen now?
There we go. Yep.
Here's the bad part. When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people. You're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please. They test and they test. We got tests that people don't know what's going on.
We've got roughly 120,000 Americans killed by this virus in the span of 4 months. And there's the president of the United States essentially mocking the virus. John, I mean, administration officials have called that particular comment tongue in cheek, but the way that the president has handled the pandemic, is that something that is going to be consequential in November or no? Or do the lion's share of Americans think that this is something that's beyond the president's control?
No, I don't think they think that. Look, 100 years ago, Walter Lippmann, who was the leading columnist of the age, wrote that one of the besetting sins of modernity was going to be that we would define and then see, as opposed to seeing and then defining, which is what the lesson of the Enlightenment is. To some extent, not to be overly grand at this hour, the Enlightenment is on the ballot in November. Are we as a public, as a voting public, as a politically engaged public, willing to believe the evidence of our own eyes as opposed to the pre-existing views that we might have in our heart or in our gut? That's what's on the ballot here. We had an enlightenment. We had a scientific revolution. We had reformations that created the modern world that was, in fact, the sum effect of those things was to say we were not simply going to blindly follow someone who happened to win an election or happened to be born to a certain family and therefore put on a throne. That's what America, the American Republic, for all of its imperfections, was about in the beginning. It's what it should be about now. And I was looking at this the other day, trying to figure out what's a measure of bipartisanship, right? And sometimes you see different congressional votes. Those are always very situational, obviously. There are two numbers that are interesting. 10% or so of Democrats crossed the aisle to vote for George W. Bush in 2000. So 10% of self-identified Democrats said, we're going to go over the aisle. In 2008, 13% of Republicans cross the aisle to vote for Senator Obama. So somewhere, and that number now is way down. It's 2, 3, 4% in terms of 2016. The question is, and the election will turn on how many self-identified Republicans will cross the aisle and not vote for Donald Trump on the evidence of what they've seen. Right? This is not a partisan point. It's not a reflexively liberal media point. It's simply a case. America was designed for people to make rational decisions about the fundamentally irrational business of politics. And that's what's going to be on the ballot here. And it's going to be the COVID response. It's going to be his basic temperament. That's the lesson of the Bolton book. What he was saying to Martha there was.
So did you guys get anything out of that? Did that help clarify anything? Did you recognize the name Walter Lippmann?
It's from Walter Lippmann's Ghost, right?
Yeah. So, and I just published, it finally came into print, I think all of a week ago now, a study on Walter Lippmann. My study has to do with what I looked at was Walter Lippmann happened to be Jewish, and he wrote he wrote about Jews a number of times, and he was from a very old established Jewish family, and he did not write about the Jews very nicely. And when Hitler came to power, at one point Hitler gave a speech, and he sort of suggested, this is 1933, Hitler sort of suggested, let's try to find a peaceful resolution to our conflict over this major treaty, the Treaty of Versailles. And so Lippmann, trying to, I think, appeal to the better angels of the German people, praised Hitler's speech and said this was a genuinely statesmanlike address, right? And it was, the timing was, you guys ever heard the Nazi book burning? So the Nazis had just burned the books, the famous thing where they did these bonfires of books. And within weeks of that, the Nazis, they were new to power, and they had banned Jews from basically every aspect of life. They had made laws that it was against the law if you were Jewish and a professor like I am, or anything else. And so in the midst of this, Lippmann wrote a column praising Hitler's speech. And obviously that outraged a lot of Jews, not just since, and not just Jews, but it outraged a lot of people at the time and since. And I kind of start my study by saying this incident highlights a basic dilemma in journalism, right? Between something that Lippmann preached all his life, which to some degree Meacham is suggesting here, which is that the journalist should be detached and neutral. And because Lippmann was trying to be neutral and detached in what he wrote. And in looking at, he was saying, let's all calm down and take a rational look at the whole thing. And then the contrary argument, which you and I have already discussed a few times in this class, is the contrary thing is that the best journalism comes from somewhere and stands for something. That there's a moral position to journalism, and that you can't separate facts and quote unquote being rational from having a moral position on things. And sometimes, like when you see the rise of totalitarianism or fascism, that involves being passionate, because that's the only way you if you're doing your job, you need sometimes in certain moments in history, people should be panicking, because that would be the appropriate reaction. And anyway, I just published that study, and I have to look at one of the things they also did at that journal was they published a teaching version of my study. So what we'll probably do in this class is, rather than maybe I'll provide you guys the study I published, but I'll also provide you just the teaching website, and we'll do one of the exercises. Actually, most of the exercises on that website are things I do with this class. Another one of them we'll do The newspaper game one, though, which I told you guys about, with where I hand out funny money and you compete. We're obviously not going to be able to do that because of the pandemic. But anyway, so Lippmann he's important in terms of what Michael Schudson writes. He's important in what I've talked about. So he's going to keep coming up in this class, I guess, is my main point. And it's interesting that Meacham draws that point about him then. And one of the reasons that, Lippmann was a brilliant media theorist. Okay, he was also someone who pushed, who really articulated this modern idea of objectivity that we've been wrestling with for the past 100 years. But he brought a lot of important ideas to think about to the table. And one of them was this idea of, in the modern world, is democracy, as Jefferson and Madison, all those people imagined it, is it obsolete? And maybe it's obsolete. There are different reasons why maybe it's obsolete, right? Like why even 100 years ago might you think that the ideas that Jefferson and Madison and whatever had about democracy weren't going to work anymore in a modern world? I gotta find my chat. Someone else might have that. Read Noah's chat. Find my chat.
Maybe they probably thought it would get too out of hand, and it would turn into just a bunch of riots and just no sense of order.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it. What do you think specifically he was afraid was getting out of hand that wouldn't have been out of hand in 1776?
Just the freedom of press, First Amendment.
Well, how had society changed between 1776 and 1920? What were some major changes? We already talked about this.
The acts, the stamp and Stamp Act and whatnot.
Well, that
and the sedition also.
Sedition.
Sedition, yeah, sedition.
Yeah, well, that all happened within the lifetimes of Jefferson and Madison and all them. But if you look at, say we were to compare our modern world to 1776, okay, that would be an easier question. How is our modern world different than it would have been in Jefferson? And why would that make democracy more complicated than it would have been in Jefferson's time?
Is that a question you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, everything. We've evolved with a lot of things. We can go halfway across the world in 15 hours. And I don't know, it's just we're growing as people, our minds are growing. So we're becoming more and more sophisticated. So with all things as we get old, we have to adapt our surroundings and mediums and our media and things like that. So I just don't think we've gone down the right path of keeping everything truthful and responsible. I think we've as we've been gotten corrupted, we've been corrupting everything around us. But I mean, it's gonna be different in our generation, for us as students, in 200 years, if anybody's around by then, they're probably going to communicate with on their wrists or something, it's going to be totally insane. It's just always going to be developing and up and coming. So things are always going to get more convoluted, and it's going to be easier to spread lies or rumors or just false information or whatever. But I mean, as we do continue to evolve as a human species, yes, we're also making life easier for us on a day-to-day basis, but we're making things really hard to stay together as a nation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so how large a country were we in 1776? What were we comprised of?
We were only not even country by that point. Well, we were getting to that point. By that point, we were still just 13 colonies on the East Coast.
Yeah. So they're talking about a democracy involving 13 colonies, right? Now we're a country of, does anyone have any idea of the population of the United States? 330 million people.
Oh, wait. No, yeah, okay.
So they devised the system for their gang of where only the white men with property could vote in 13 colonies, right? We now have a country of 320 million. As Luke said, you couldn't get on a plane, right? In his time. How has media changed? Do you guys remember let me share the screen again. You guys remember what the communication technology, such as it was, looked like in 1776? Let me drop that picture for you guys again.
A pigeon with a note tied to it.
And a letter with an engraved red stamp and a wheelbarrow.
Or this is their machinery. This is their media technology.
Futile to what we have compared to today.
So, yeah, but I mean, so is ours better? I mean, for democracy?
Yes and no. Yes, because it's quicker and more efficient, but no, because I think since anyone could have access to technology, anyone could get their message across. So it all depends on how you use it.
So if you think about what would have been the nature of that technology in 1920, you guys remember we were talking about what we talked about this a week or two ago, like what technology was available then. We went through the different media that had come around by 1920.
The printing press, right?
Right, but that had gone from this to, you guys still seeing my screen, right? To this by 1830, to then by 1890s, this, which could create, and which was accompanied by this.
Jesus Christ.
Right? So,
Well, now we don't need actual, I don't think.
right. But
I'm
so,
actually not sure. I don't think we need people to man these machines anymore.
but Jefferson time, Lippmann's time, right? Just for the printing, just for press, right? And then there was radio by Lippmann's time, right? There was the Hollywood movie industry by Lippmann's time. There wasn't an internet. So a lot of like what you guys are thinking, but what's the difference between this kind of technology and the internet technology? You guys know this. That's all one way, right? These people are producing and putting out a message, but there's no way to transmit back at them, right? Like the way you can with the internet. So imagine what the implications that would have been for Lippmann's generation. How many people does it take to control the message at that point? To how many receivers? How many senders do you need to how many receivers? You can have a handful of really powerful corporations and politicians sending out, using this kind of massive machinery to send out a message to millions of people. That's obviously going to have you would have to think about whether that's going to have an effect on the idea that Jefferson and Madison and all them had on newspapers, right? Or on the press, or on the role of media, right? But I would say this, and I think you guys are getting it, but Lippmann's idea was that, and we'll talk about this again, we'll go back to this, but that we lived in a much more complicated and sophisticated world, and that your average, do you guys remember, you guys might have been too young for this, but Joe the plumber came up in an election. So it was this guy named Joe, and he was a plumber. He ended up on TV during one of these town halls or whatever. And so Joe the plumber became a thing, right? But it's like, your average voter, Joe the plumber. Like, how does Joe the plumber know the details of like climate science? Or how does Joe the plumber know the policy of like healthcare? Like whether it should be a federally funded thing. And, and then part of Lippmann's whole thing, and then, we'll have to get into this, and I should really talk to you guys about the slides now, but it was the role of experts. What role do the experts have in all this? But I think we got into this because just because Meacham brought him up to say, do we still have a democracy? 100 years ago, Lippmann was saying, with all the changes going on in the world, do we still have a functioning democracy? So now you have to think of like how much has changed since 1920 that's made everything that he warned about even more of an issue, right?